Jonathan at the back.
Thanks, Miles. And I'm Jonathan. I'm the Media and Public Affairs Officer here at ODI. I'd just like to echo what Miles said about us being delighted to be working with One World Media Week again. It's great to be involved in this week, and I think it's a great chance to get people together to discuss the kind of issues we're talking about today. I just want to firstly, in true ODI style, explore some of the evidence that's out there about the importance of the ways that we use the word development, draw a bit on my own experience and provide some thoughts on what that's led me to come to a semi-conclusion on. In terms of evidence, we know from the International Broadcasting Trust that coverage of international factual programming has fallen by 41% in the last 5 years. That's non-news reporting, but that's quite a significant statement about the amount of space there is on our television screens for coverage of some of the issues it is that we're there to try and promote and generate coverage and discussion and understanding of. We know too from work that the LSE have been doing with Birkbeck that there's a feeling that we still have a bit of a hangover from the Live Aid era of a transactional process of development, and that's something that recent research that ODI has done with colleagues at IPPR also echoes, is this need to kind of get away from that Live Aid framing, and there's a real challenge about how we do that, but both of those reports are well worth a look. And finally, Intermedia, who I think did One World Media's event on Monday, produced a report called Building Support for Development. And they found, and I quote, that terms such as international development and food security are considered vague and do not resonate with interested citizens. So that's something I think that Mary said and that Andrew said to an extent. The word development is increasingly meaningless. Drawing on my own personal experience, I joined ODI with very little previous development experience, and I think that makes me quite rare within ODI, but perhaps gives me a slightly unique view of the use of the word development for an organisation that has development quite literally at the heart of its name. And one of the things I found very quickly when I went for a drink after work and told people what my new job was, the kind of Overseas Development Institute, and the kind of all three words are worthy of some discussion. But the main one that met with the most was development, and kind of I realised that actually there wasn't the level of understanding about what development is that a lot of us take as granted in the work that we do as soon as you went to talk to people who aren't immersed in it from 9 to 5. And that was a bit of a real wake-up call for me. I was at the OECD World Forum in Busan as well, actually. I joined the group of people that were there, and I noticed that a lot of the Western journalists were actually some of the savvier NGOs who'd come as the Morning Star and the Church Times and various others in order to clobber the bigger journalists who were there and get them to cover their story. But as Brian said, on this occasion, in terms of Western media, quite a few of the outlets weren't there, and yet we were discussing issues which are not only of importance in terms of how we spend our money, but of importance in terms of the way that we want as a country to influence how people develop their own lives. And I think that's something that is worthy of coverage. I'll give you some very recent experience. Yesterday, Andrew's already said, as he's very kindly stood in at short notice for Mike Thompson from the BBC, who was called away on a story. I made phone calls to try and find out who else could step in on the panel. I got in touch with Andrew early, but in my situation, you probably would have done the same thing and been on the phone a couple of times thinking, who's going to be able to help us? And I spoke to a few journalists and I said, well, I'm after someone who's interested in development but happy to talk about the challenges they face in trying to get development stories past the newsroom and onto the TV or into the paper. And one journalist said, well, there isn't really anyone who does development. Well, that's the point of the whole event. And I said, can you not find somebody on the editorial side who makes these decisions? And another journalist said to me, well, they're not interested. And I thought, well, that's the point of the whole event. And then thirdly, somebody said to me, it's the Andrew Mitchell inquiry on Andrew Mitchell's decision to give aid to Rwanda tomorrow morning. And I tried to get that past my news editor, and he wasn't interested. And I said, well, it's important. It's about conflict in Central and East Africa. And he said, and it's about Plebgate. And the minute it's about Plebgate was discussed in the newsroom, they were like, oh, we're interested in that. And it took that aspect of some of the more gossipy and harder side of UK politics to actually be able to bring in what is a key development issue into the national mainstream news and media conversation. So from my experience, I thought that shows how important the language that we use is. And we use this term, in my view, development, frequently without really thinking about what we're saying. So I got to thinking about what are the things that we can try and do to address this, and I've got a couple of ideas and would be interested in thoughts on those. The first is that we should get real about aid. And actually, I have a view that aid and development have become somewhat conflated. And I'd be very interested to get Brian's view on that, as to whether this understanding of development and this understanding of aid are actually far too close, and do we need to separate those two things out? The second is to be more precise about the work that we do. If we work for an organisation that is training doctors, we don't work in development, we work for an organisation that's training doctors. If we work for an organisation that provides infrastructure advice to developing economies, that's about building roads. It's not doing development. So I think we should perhaps try and be more precise about the work that we do. And that echoes conversations with journalists who aren't going to recognise some of the abstract terms that we use, but are going to understand about real people's lives and interesting things that are happening. I think sometimes we try and make things more complex than they should be. That may be a development instinct to defend ourselves and the complexity and importance of the project that we're involved in, but also I think we could do without, and we clearly, and I'm sure everybody would agree, use far too much jargon. I remember on Twitter recently another well-known development blogger, who will remain nameless on this occasion, used the word disintermediated. And I tweeted at him, having just written this piece. I said, what does the word disintermediated mean? And I didn't get back a kind of thoughtful explanation about taking somebody out of the loop or something like that. I got back a link to Google, which was a little bit frustrating. But that use of the word disintermediated, other examples, multicollinearity gets bandied around, things like that. What on earth does this mean? How can we expect people who are not immersed in our environment to get to grips with what we're saying? And I don't know about anybody else, but I face a real interpretive challenge of working with some really very clever, very driven, amazing people who have amazing ideas, but actually you really do have to spend time interpreting those sometimes. And I'd be grateful for people's experience on that interpretation. And last but not least, I've posed one question on, is aid and development, are those two things close together? I'm interested to know from people here as well what their view is on the emergence of niche development media. And Brian mentioned that we've got a very healthy blogosphere. We do have a very healthy blogosphere. Is that something that perpetuates an ability to use these jargony terms and talk amongst ourselves? Is it something that provides a useful service? Is it something we should embrace? The Guardian development site continues to go from strength to strength. And if it is, what then is the role for our engagement with mainstream media? So that's some thoughts from me and a couple of questions. Thank you.